Okay, so today's demonstration is to prepare you to do the abstract self-portrait project. And I just want to show you a number of techniques that could be useful to you. I have light tracing tables over there so that you could trace, okay? But sometimes, and what if I painted this thing all black, for example? It's really dark. Would I be able to trace?
No.
No. So there's another way you can do it too. It's called image transfer. And this is how you can transfer anything where using the tracing table doesn't work, okay? So suppose I want to get this onto my paper. I could turn this over, and I can generally see through the paper just enough to know that this is basically the general area. And then, so what I'll do is on the back with regular pencil is color really dark, okay? And have you ever used carbon paper before? Okay, carbon copy paper. That's another way of image transferring, but we don't have any carbon copy paper. But this is sort of a like a budget way to do that. Okay. The idea is when I turn this back over, I can trace it, and wherever I trace, I want this pencil, this graphite, to transfer on. Now, you may need, if you're using a pencil like I am, you may need to sharpen it once or twice. Just trying to get, like, where would I trace? And I just want to make sure I get pencil coverage with the graphite on those areas. I think I'm good to go there. So now, when I lay this on the paper, wherever I want, hold it down, maybe even put a little piece of tape down. You can use a pen or a sharp pencil. And then what I would try to do is trace the edges as accurately as possible. You can see when I hold it in place, you see how it's transferring through like that? Okay. I won't trace the whole thing, but the key here is, if you are doing this with the portrait project, you want to trace accurately. What I mean by that is sometimes when we're tracing our own image, we think about it as, oh, my nose doesn't really look like that, or my hair doesn't really stick out a little bit like that. And then we get concerned about how we're going to look in the project. And then we end up tracing it and fixing it along the way. What happens when you fix it along the way? When you're done,
It'll look bad.
it doesn't look like you. It just looks like a face, or it looks like somebody else. So with this project, you really do need to embrace the imperfections from your image. And nobody's perfect. There we go. So you can see here, I'll just do the neck here. Good. So when I do that, there's an image transfer of the face. And if you can't quite make it out, sometimes with this one side by side, you can see what's what. If you really can't make it out, it's probably because you didn't do this step very dark, or you missed spots. Okay, so now what could I do with this? I could get a marker and I could ink it, and we learned all about inking things when we were doing our Elements of Art page. So the whole image transfer thing, that's just basically step one to this process, right? But do I need to ink it? No. Could I do this with color pencil? Could I make this darker with regular pencil? What if it's on black paper or something dark? I could do this with a metallic silver Sharpie or a paint marker, which I usually have some paint markers available to you if you need them. I could get a wet paintbrush and I could paint this. There's a lot of things you can do. So this is just one way of image transferring from a printout onto the surface of your project if you can't use the tracing table. The tracing table is preferred when possible. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is push this to the side. I'm going to stay on this paper right here. and I'm going to talk to you about some various art materials that may be useful for you in this class on this project. And at the painting station, you'll find this right here. This is a disposable palette pad. I'll move this off to the side for now. Now, this is so that paint can go on here, and then you carry it to your desk, and it's your palette. And then when you're done, at the end of the period, you could fold it and then throw it away. Okay, you don't have to wash a palette. Now, one thing you need to know about these disposable paint palettes, they're glossy on one side, they're not glossy on the other. The top is the glossy side, okay? Okay, so I've got some paint out here. I got some acrylic white, titanium white. I've got some primary magenta and primary blue. And I want to talk to you about getting the appropriate amount of paint, okay? First of all, see how this bottle's like looking really crushed? We don't like that, right? The reason it looks crushed is some students treat it like a squeeze bottle. It's not a squeeze bottle at all, like a ketchup bottle at home, okay? So sometimes when you squeeze them, they stay that way and they get crushed. So anyway, but how do you use it? Now this one is almost empty. It's got some dried up acrylic at the top. So this is acrylic paint. It dries like a plastic. Isn't that cool? Dries like a plastic. Okay, so for that reason, you don't want to get acrylic paint on your clothes. If you get it on your clothes, you have to get it out immediately, flush it with water, rub soap into it, and then it'll probably come out. You don't want it to dry in your clothes or it'll be permanent, okay? All right, so this bottle is like only a third full. So check this out. I'm going to turn it upside down. Before I do any squeezing, I'm going to use gravity to my advantage. So I need to do that, and then all that just dropped down. Some came out. Let's pretend none came out though. How much would I get? So what I do is I hold it close and I give it a gentle squeeze, and as soon as it touches the paper, I stop squeezing, and that's the appropriate amount of paint to get. Okay, if it's a tiny bit more, no big deal. But we don't want to just squeeze out big mounds of it like we're pumping ketchup at Wendy's or something like that, because all this that we don't use goes to the garbage at the end of the period, and it doesn't go back into the bottle. Okay, we're going to try to avoid wasting. Okay, so I kind of felt it drop to the bottom. Now, gentle squeezes, it comes out. See? Now this one's a new bottle, so this white is mostly full. So I don't really need, it's just right there. It'll come right out like that. Okay? All right, so next thing I'm going to get is a cup of water. I'm going to get a few paintbrushes to have available to myself. And another thing we want is some paper towel. So the paper towel is so that when you dip your brush in the water, we don't want all this water getting into the paint. So we use the paper towel to soak the water out of the bristles. Okay? All right, so I want to show you some paint techniques that would be useful to you. Okay? First, I'll take a little bit of this one and kind of brush some of it down. I want to let that dry for a second. So we'll let that pause there for a second. Okay, next, two brushes, right? So suppose I take some magenta here and I blob it on, and then I get a second brush and maybe grab some primary blue and blob it on. While they're both wet, if I take this blue, kind of push it into there, and then I take this magenta and push it into there, I can get a blend between them. Isn't that cool? Mm-hmm. And this technique works when both paints are wet. So this is called wet on wet. So if you want any sort of blending or gradation or ombre effect between your paint, you want to work them both while they're both wet. Okay? Dry that off or soak the water out. Okay. If you want to be able to paint clean edges, let's say I take some of this and I want to paint nice clean edges in there, it's not really going to work, is it, right? It's going to kind of mix on there because wet on wet doesn't get you that. But if the paper's dry, I could, you know what, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. I could paint right along that pencil line, see? And then pull that in. And My recommendation is if you're painting along a line, don't paint on the line like this. I kind of come at it from the side, from the painted side, and then get right up to the pencil line, and I'm pulling my brush. And then I kind of paint in toward the middle. So if you wanted to do any careful painting, the surface that you're painting on needs to be dry. Does that make sense? Now, I could do whatever I want in here, right? But some people make the mistake of saying, oh, I'm going to paint here, and then I'll paint out to the edge. But that is not as effective as if I start neatly at the edge and then paint in toward the middle. Okay? So that's just one little tip there. Okay? All right. Now, this over here, this is dry already. So one coat of paint on the fresh paper, it dries pretty quickly. If you blob on lots of paint, it might take overnight to dry. Okay? But I want to show you another little wet on dry technique. Suppose I take this white right here and I blob that on top of this wet paint. Check this out. I can turn my brush over and do this. This is called sgraffito, right? Where the color underneath peeks through. And you can get all kinds of cool textures and things like that when you do sgraffito. Okay, another thing I'd like to show you is maybe you grab one of these sponge brushes and kind of load it up. And you could sponge brush, right, like this, or you can also twist them. See? You get some pretty cool looks that way as well. If you use one of these, please don't just let the paint dry in it like that. Please clean it up, okay? Additionally, there's a brush technique that you'll see me use here also when I show you watercolor later. This is called dry brushing. So if you have your bristles dried up mostly, and then I can get this little tappy motion started, and I'm gonna just slightly load up the bristles like this with this tap motion. Okay, kind of get it going. And then I can come over here and do this technique. This is called dry brushing. It's just another texture, another way you can blend. And then you can also bring in other colors, fade colors out. So this is called dry brushing. Works pretty cool, right? Make sure you clean that brush off. If you let paint dry up into the bristles of your brush, the paint will dry solid and it'll ruin the brush forever. We want to avoid that. So next I want to tell you about this stuff. It's called acrylic gel medium. Acrylic paint is made up of two things. It's made up of pigment, which gives it color, and the medium. In this case, the medium is acrylic. Maybe you've heard of oil paint. In that case, the medium is oil, right? So acrylic gel medium is essentially acrylic paint without any pigment inside it. So I'm going to load some up onto...
Like a clear coat?
Yeah, you can think of it as a clear coat. So there's a couple cool things we can do here. All right, suppose I had something that I printed out like this, maybe this hand, and maybe I just have whatever this is and I want to glue it down, right? If you want, you can use regular glue, or you can use this technique that we call decoupage, okay? So this is going to go down here. So what I would do is I would take this clear gel medium and I would brush it down on the surface of the paper first and do this generously, not too thin because I don't want it to dry too quick. Then I can lay my paper down and then brush the gel medium over the top. And this is called decoupage. What happens, it looks hazy, but the gel medium will dry clear and it basically seals it in. You can also do this with tissue paper, which is kind of cool. I have this orange tissue paper here. Maybe I brush it down over this area right here, lay it down, Tissue paper is translucent oftentimes. And then I brush back over top of the tissue paper. So if you want to glue anything down in a nice, neat, sealed-in way, you can use this technique called decoupage. Okay. All right, another thing you can do with gel medium is this. Suppose I take some magenta and I mix it with white. What am I going to get?
A lighter magenta or pink?
It's like a lighter one, or we could call that pink, right? If I take white, which has white pigment in it, and mix it with magenta and it makes that pink color, it's got coverage. Do you see how that has coverage right there? And maybe I don't want it to cover as much. So what you can do is you can actually create a translucent glaze of color by taking paint. Let's say I take this magenta and I mix some gel medium with it. It almost on my palette looks the same, like I'm making a pink color, but all I'm doing is changing the ratio of pigment to acrylic. And this will get me a more translucent glaze. You see that? It's kind of like the tissue paper is translucent, right? So that's another thing that you can do with clear gel medium, is you can make a translucent colored glaze out of it. Okay, so if I was done with this, I could fold it in half and throw it in the garbage, and I don't have to wash a palette. I'm going to set this off to the side. So the next thing I want to show you are oil pastels, and we have a drawer, set of drawers with lots of different color oil pastels. And oil pastels are like crayons, except they're made of oil, not wax. The cool thing about oil pastels is they show up on dark surfaces. So this magenta right here is kind of dry. See how the green shows up on top of there? Mm-hmm. The white shows up, the white will show up on top of this blue. You can smear the oil pastels. You can mix them together. So if I had white and blue, I can smear them together with my fingers. And you can do all kinds of cool things with these. You could also use maybe a palette knife or a needle tool, and you can do sgraffito with oil pastels as well. Okay, but they are very oily. They do get on your fingers. They get on your fingers. The way to get them off would first use dry paper towel as much as possible, and then wash your hands with soap and water. All right, next we're going to learn about watercolor. So I've got a new cup of water here, because when you are doing watercolor, you want to have clean water. And here I have some used watercolor, and these are over by the paint station, usually in a yellow basket. Try to open that up a little bit. Now if this looks too messy, let's say this palette's too messy, you can take it to the sink and you can wipe it out like this. So watercolor is pretty cool. A lot of people they're worried about using watercolor. They think the colors are going to be too light and too faded. Does that ever happen to you? Okay, so let me show you a little trick. The way watercolor works is the ratio of water to pigment makes a difference. So if I just barely wet my brush here, and let's say I load it up into this blue right here. Okay, so barely any water. And what I'm doing is I'm just really trying to load up the bristles with this paint, but with as little water as I can. What that allows me to do is achieve a pretty deep color, right? Now when we use watercolor, I don't actually recommend you use white. If you want to use a lighter color, the trick is to add more water. And I'm going to use this palette over here to help me with that. So I could take some of this paint over here, and then I will add some water into that. And that gets me the same color, but a lighter tone, a lighter shade. Okay, so now a little bit more water, less pigment, a little bit lighter. A little more water, less pigment, a little bit lighter. A little more water, less pigment, a little bit lighter. Okay, could probably do a little bit darker right there. There we go. Okay, so I have a little bit of a value scale here, don't I, of going dark to light. And this is the actual same color on the palette, just different amounts of water. that get you that look, okay? Now, what if I wanted to blend this to this? One trick is to, let's say I want to start this over here and I want to fade this off over there. What I do is I get clean water and I skip to where I want to fade it to and I wet the paper. Check this out. When I wet the paper and I come back to it, it fades into that direction. You see? So if you want to fade it away into white, you wet the paper with clean water and then you come back into the color like that, and I can let it dry like that. Now this technique I'm using to make this, this is wet on dry, right? So if I want to paint any specific things, even with a smaller brush, I need to paint on a dry surface. If you pre-wet the paper like this, right, it'll get you different results, you see? You can't do precision painting on a wet surface, but it gets you other really cool looks on a wet surface that you can't get on a dry surface. So like this is a dry surface, and this is a wet surface. So this is wet on wet, and this is wet on dry. In addition to that, you can use surface tension to your advantage. Imagine I take some water here, and I come over here and I paint a triangle with water. Now I get some color, and I just touch the paint in there, and look at that. The paint only wants to stay in the pre-wet surface. Isn't that cool? And this is because of surface tension. Okay, the water only wants to stay in the area that's been wet. And you can see that happening over here. Of course, if I break the surface tension or blow it and use gravity to my advantage, I can get all kinds of cool drips. This looks pretty cool, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This looks kind of cool. This looks kind of cool. Did you notice I didn't brush over top of it over and over and over and over? You actually want to do less, okay? If I take paint here and I brush down and I just keep brushing over the same spot because I think I'm making it better and I'm like, oh, I just need to keep doing this, keep doing that. And if you overbrush, what happens is the paper is going to begin to disintegrate a little bit, it's going to pill, and the color loses its luster, and we want to avoid that. You can also dry brush, right? We got too much in there. There we go. So dry brushing works well with watercolor as well, okay? Now, staying on watercolor, I want to bring back in oil pastels. Suppose I do some oil pastels on the paper. Oil and water don't mix, do they? Right? So I can take some watercolor and look. You can do that on the oil pastel and it creates a resist. Just be careful not to be too aggressive over top of the oil pastel because it can like get onto the brush, okay? If you take Crayola marker onto the paper, tell you what, I'll do another piece of paper here. I can do whatever I want with Crayola marker, and that's pretty cool, but you can also take a wet brush and it will turn into watercolor, right? And why would you want to do that? You could do something kind of cool. What if I made a drawing with precision, right? Maybe I have like this cool, maybe a nose, an eyebrow, got a little cheekbone, little portrait, right? And then I like, oh, I would love it if it just sort of was partly wet, you see? But I want some of it to be wet, and I want some of it to not be wet with the water, right? So you can do some really clever things with Crayola and a wet brush. All right, so that concludes this general demonstration, and I hope you guys have fun with the materials.